What if the most powerful person in the room said absolutely nothing? Imagine being so composed, your enemies fear your silence more than your words. In a world obsessed with loud voices and louder egos, true power whispers, and sometimes it doesn't speak at all. A lion doesn't roar before it pounces. And the strongest man, he doesn't speak to be feared. While others shout, threaten, and fill the room with noise and drama, he simply watches, calm, focused, unreadable. Some people try to dominate with volume, emotional outbursts, aggressive, words puffed up pride, but real strength, it's not noisy, it's quiet, controlled, mysterious, and that's exactly why it's so terrifying. Because when you can't predict someone, you can't control them. And what you can't control, you start to fear. In this life, the person everyone fears isn't the loudest voice in the room. It's the one who says nothing at all, yet somehow shifts the energy just by being there. The man whose silence doesn't scream, "I don't care," but whispers, "I see everything and I choose not to react." That's the kind of presence we're about to build together today. Not through tricks, not through speeches, but through 6 powerful internal states, forged from the timeless teachings of Stoic philosophy. Each one will reshape how others see you, and more importantly, how they fear what they can't understand. They won't know what you're thinking. They won't know what you'll do next. And that uncertainty, that's what gives you power. So, let's begin. They were waiting for an outburst, a twitch, a raised voice, a furious reaction. But what did you give them? Silence. Pure, unshakable silence, and that was the turning point. You see, most people react instinctively. Someone insults them, they rush to defend. Someone threatens, they try to explain. Someone provokes, they explode. But that's not strength, that's weakness in disguise. That's giving your enemy control over your emotions, over you, because the moment they make you react, they've already won. They now own your peace, and when you lash out, when you argue, when you show them they got under your skin, you hand over your power piece by piece. But now imagine this. You don't flinch. You don't frown. You don't say a single word. You simply stare back, steady, calm, unreadable, like still water that hides unspoken depth. Suddenly, they're the ones who feel exposed. They're the ones who start to doubt. That's the terrifying truth. Not the noise, but the silence. Because in that silence, you hold up a mirror. You make your enemies confront their own fear, their own insecurity, their own lack of control. They wanted chaos. You gave them stillness. They wanted a reaction. You gave them a void. And here's the thing about the void. It never lies. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And when you choose not to react, when you stand firm in focused, deliberate stillness, you're not being weak. You're showing that the real battle, it's already been won inside yourself. I once knew a man, quiet, average-looking, never raised his voice, never needed to. One day in a boardroom surrounded by colleagues, someone tried to humiliate him, mocked his ideas, called him outdated, laughed in his face. Everyone turned to watch, expecting him to fight back, but he didn't. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't blink, he just looked calm, unreadable, and in that moment the power shifted. Everyone felt it. Just before this moment, we saw a man face hostility without flinching. He didn't meet aggression with aggression. He didn't defend or explain. And now what followed next was even more powerful. The man didn't argue. He didn't even acknowledge the insult. He simply looked at his attacker and asked calmly, "Are you finished?" Then, without waiting for a response, he turned his eyes back to the spreadsheet and continued working as if nothing had happened. The entire room froze. Silence fell like a heavy curtain. The attacker, suddenly stripped of his audience, seemed to shrink in place. But that silence, it didn't say weakness. No, it whispered something far more unsettling. You don't shake me. You don't define me. And that truth? It shattered the enemy more completely than any sharp retort ever could. A man who cannot be rattled is a man who cannot be touched. A man who does not need to prove anything becomes the most commanding presence in the room. That's why you must train your stillness, master your pause, let the storm howl and remain unmoved. Because in a world addicted to reactions, the refusal to respond becomes the most terrifying power of all. There's a kind of presence that doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't chase attention or arrive with fanfare. It's not loud, flashy, or dramatic. It's simply calm, centered, unshakable, and that's what makes it so intimidating. Most people are noise. They fill the air with nervous chatter, restless movements, overcompensation. They crave attention like it's oxygen. They seek validation like it's water. They try to dominate space without realizing that real power doesn't dominate. It simply occupies, and it does so unapologetically because it's earned, not performed. There's something deeply unsettling about a man who doesn't flinch, who doesn't explain, who doesn't chase or smile to be liked, who simply stands aware, grounded, and untouchable, and in that stillness something strange begins to happen. People start speaking more softly around him. They choose their words with care. They glance at him before finishing a sentence, not out of fear but out of an instinctive respect, not because he demanded it, but because his energy made it necessary. That is power, not the kind that yells, not the kind that begs to be noticed, but the kind that radiates quietly, from within, forged by discipline, clarity, and restraint. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And the man who carries this kind of unshakable presence doesn't need to ignore his enemies. He rises so far above them they no longer know how to reach him. That's why they fear him. I once knew a man named Elias. He wasn't particularly tall, didn't dress to impress, rarely smiled. But the moment he stepped into a room, everyone noticed, not because he tried, but because he didn't. He walked slowly, spoke only when needed, held eye contact just long enough to make people shift in their seats. And every word, every silence, every gesture felt deliberate. Even when he said nothing, it felt like something important had just been said. He worked in a high-stakes industry where ego was currency. Meetings were loud. People competed to sound the smartest. But Elias, he stayed quiet. He waited until everyone had worn themselves out. Then he asked one question, usually just one sentence, and the entire room would shift from noise to focus. In an instant, it wasn't just what he said. It was how he carried himself, no wasted motion, no unnecessary He was a living reminder. In a world built on reaction, stillness is a weapon. People started to fear his silence, not because it was empty, but because it was unreadable. It meant he was watching, thinking, choosing his moment. And the ones who fear you the most, they're not the ones who yell. They're the ones who can't predict your next move. That is the power of unshakable presence. It keeps your enemies guessing. It makes manipulators step more carefully. It forces even the loudest voices to lower themselves in your quiet. So the question now is, how do you build it? You stop performing. He no longer needed to prove anything. He didn't need to speak to assert his position. His silent presence was enough to make the entire room adjust. And that's when we begin to see the true power of stillness. You stop chasing attention. You slow your breath, straighten your spine. You observe more than you speak. And you practice doing it nothing until your stillness becomes the loudest thing in the room. Because a man who is deeply rooted in purpose, in clarity, and in self-restraint doesn't need to move fast. He makes the world slow down to meet him. And when that happens, you no longer need to assert your power, you become it. There's a reason people insult you. It's not always because they hate you. Sometimes it's because they fear you. They fear what you represent. They fear your progress, your calm, your refusal to play by their emotional rules. So they attack, not with fists but with words. Not to win, but to provoke, to see if they can shake you, if they can make you lose your balance. Because here's the truth, insults aren't about truth, they're about control. They want to disrupt your balance, they want to see if they can bend your peace, they want to feel powerful by making you react. But the moment you respond, no matter how intelligent your comeback is, no matter how justified your anger feels, is the moment you've given them what they came for. They won. As soon as you lose your peace, even for a second, they've won. But when you don't flinch, when you don't explain, when you don't even acknowledge the insult, it echoes louder in their heads than it ever could in yours, because silence in the face of attack isn't weakness. It's a verdict, a cold, calm declaration that says, "You're not worth my response." And there's nothing more humiliating than being ignored by the very person you tried to hurt. I once knew a woman named Clara. She worked in a toxic corporate environment where gossip and passive-aggressive behavior were the currency of status. There was one co-worker, bitter, petty, and envious, who made it her mission to tear Clara down. At first, the insults were subtle. Backhanded compliments, whispers just loud enough to hear, sarcasm disguised as jokes in meetings. But Clara, she never took the bait, not once. She smiled gently, took her notes, focused on the work, and walked out of every room with the same unshaken calm she walked in with. Over time, something strange happened. The attacker began getting louder, meaner, more desperate to provoke a reaction. But the more she tried, the smaller she became, until one day people stopped laughing, stopped listening, because when you keep punching at a wall that doesn't move, you start to look ridiculous. Clara didn't fight back. She didn't expose her enemy. She simply stood still, so still that the other woman fell under her own momentum. That's what Stoicism teaches you. Let fools reveal themselves. Let the insult fall flat against your silence. Let the attacker crumble under the weight of their own insecurity. Epictetus wrote, "If someone speaks ill of you, instead of defending yourself, say, 'He obviously doesn't know me very well.'" What does this mean? It means never give your enemy the satisfaction of an explanation. Don't give them your outrage. Don't give them your clarity. Give them your silence. Because the one who doesn't defend himself is either defeated or so far above the fight that the battle never reached him in the first place. Be the latter. Let your silence say everything. Let your dignity be the thing they can't tear down, and the next time someone insults you, smile. Not because it didn't hurt, but because it didn't reach where it mattered most. People fear what they can't predict. They may not admit it, but the moment you become unreadable, you become dangerous. Because control always starts with information. Your fears, your ambitions, your routines, your weaknesses, they're all leverage in the wrong hands. The more you speak, the more you explain, the more they listen. But not to understand you. No, They listen to map you, to learn how to move you, shake you, and play you. But what if you stopped? What if you withheld just enough of yourself to become a puzzle they can't solve? When you move without announcement, without justification, you become a problem they can't decipher. You become a question they can't answer, a storm they can't forecast, and that is terrifying. You don't need to lie. You don't need to deceive. You simply need to leave space between who you are and what they know. The Stoics understood this deeply. They didn't live loudly. They didn't broadcast their desires into the world. They moved with purpose, not publicity. They shared what was necessary, but never everything, because everything revealed is everything that can be exploited. Seneca wrote, "It is a great thing to know the season for speech and the season for silence." And sometimes silence isn't just wisdom, it's defense. I once met a man named Caleb. He was soft-spoken, disciplined, and never overshared. When people asked him personal questions, he'd smile, deflect with something light, and then redirect the conversation. Not cold, not distant, just careful. Some called him mysterious, others called him arrogant. But over time, those same people began to respect him. Why? Because they couldn't figure him out. They didn't know what made him angry, what made him insecure, or what he truly wanted. They didn't have any emotional levers to pull, and that made him unpredictable. They couldn't use anything against him. And when the pressure came, when workplace drama exploded, when rumors flew, Caleb remained untouched, because no one had a grip on his emotional levers. No one had seen the blueprint. He moved like a shadow, and they feared what he might do next, simply because they didn't know what he was capable of. That's the power of being unreadable. The enemy can't break what they can't reach, and they can't reach what they don't understand. Want to build that kind of armor? Then stop narrating your every move. Stop announcing your every goal. Stop giving people access to every chamber of your mind. Let them guess. Let them wonder. Let them assume, and let them be wrong. Because a man who keeps something to himself isn't hiding weakness. He's preserving power. And the world has no weapon for a man who walks in silence, holds his truth like a sword, and reveals only what the moment demands. Let them study you. Let them try to decode your silence. Let them burn their energy trying to predict a pattern that doesn't exist outside of your own will. In a world obsessed with talking, doing becomes rare and terrifying. We live in an age where everyone's announcing something, their next move, their latest plan, their goals, routines, transformations, and upgrades. They talk about what they'll do before they've done it, and they mistake attention for progress. But here's the truth. The more you talk, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to stop. But a man who acts in silence, who builds without broadcasting, who plans without promising, he becomes unstoppable. Because by the time the world reacts, it's already too late. The Stoics weren't interested in speeches. They didn't post daily affirmations or shout their virtue from the rooftops. Their actions spoke louder than any words ever could. As we've seen, action without noise is the clearest form of self-respect. And this is something the Stoics understood better than anyone. They lived quietly, ruthlessly, with discipline. They knew that action without fanfare is the clearest sign of self-respect. Epictetus said it best: "Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Let others explain. Let them sell the dream. Let them chase applause for the idea of success while you chase the thing itself." I once knew a woman named Samira. She was brilliant, driven, but quiet to the point of near invisibility. While others at her firm boasted about new projects, upcoming promotions and side hustles, Samira kept her head down and worked. At first, no one noticed her. They thought she was soft, passive, even forgettable, until one day her name came up as the one person in the company who had built a system that saved millions. Suddenly everyone turned to look, but by then she was already gone. Promoted, transferred, elevated to a level they never saw coming because they were too busy talking. That's the power of silent action. It shifts power without warning. It creates results that don't need to be explained, and it leaves your enemies stunned, not because they didn't see you coming, but because they forgot to take you seriously until it was far too late. Want to cultivate that power? Then shut the door, do the work, let your efforts echo in silence. Don't warn people, don't predict your greatness, don't overpromise. Just disappear into action and reappear with results. Because when you act, without warning, you don't just avoid resistance, you create fear. Not the fear of what you said you would do, but the fear of what you might do next. And that silence, that tension, that mystery becomes louder than any word you could have spoken. There's something deeply unsettling about a person who doesn't need approval. In a world built on likes, applause, and social calibration, most people learn to bend, to edit themselves, to shrink their voices just enough to stay likable. They laugh when they don't feel like it. They nod when they disagree. They downplay their truth just to avoid friction. And that's why the one who doesn't do it, the one who walks in exactly as he is, becomes a threat. Not because he's cruel, not because he's confrontational, but because he reminds everyone else of how much they've compromised. Authenticity is confronting, especially to the inauthentic. When you stop trying to fit in, you do more than free yourself. You make people uncomfortable, not by attacking them, but by reflecting something they abandoned long ago. The courage to be real. Once knew a man named Jace. He wasn't loud, he wasn't edgy, but he had a way of making people uneasy without ever trying. He spoke clearly, but never adjusted his tone to win people over. He didn't follow trends, he wore what he liked, said what he meant. And when others gossiped, he stayed quiet. Not out of fear, but out of principle. Some people avoided him. They'd say he was intense, or that he thought he was better than everyone. But deep down, what they felt wasn't pressure from him, but from their own inability to do what he was doing. He was simply himself, unapologetically and consistently, and that was more radical than any rebellion. That's the paradox of authenticity. It doesn't shout, it doesn't argue, it just stands there calmly and forces others to examine their task. The Stoics believed in living according to your nature, not the world's expectations, not the crowd's mood, just virtue, integrity, and alignment, even if it makes you the odd one out, especially then. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." As we've seen, the real power doesn't come from the noise or the applause. It comes from the silence, the stillness. So be one. You don't need to convince anyone of anything. You don't need to match the energy of the room, blend into the crowd, or even be understood. You only need to be real. In a world obsessed with performance, where everyone's trying to fit into molds or meet expectations, being real becomes something rare and, yes, terrifying. Want to become that kind of force? Then stop apologizing for who you are. Stop watering yourself down to stay digestible. Stop hiding your edge, your pace, your clarity just to make others comfortable. Speak less, mean more. Say no when it's a no, walk away when it's over. And above all, never apologize for the standard you hold, especially when you're holding it for yourself first. Because when you become the version of yourself who doesn't flinch, who doesn't adapt just to get attention, and who doesn't perform for applause, you don't just walk in peace, you walk with pressure. The kind of silent pressure that makes weaker men adjust their masks before you even look at them. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't threaten. You didn't beg for respect. And yet they hesitated, they second-guessed, they feared what you might do because you gave them nothing to read, but everything to feel. You didn't fight the enemy. You simply became the kind of person who makes enemies uncomfortable by just existing. No drama, no power struggles, just silence, forged through self-mastery. Because the most feared person in the room isn't the one who speaks the loudest. It's the one who doesn't need to. So don't shout, don't explain, don't rush to be seen. Let your stillness speak for you. Let your boundaries echo. Let your silence do the damage they never saw coming. And when they finally understand who you are, you'll already be gone. Quiet, focused, and untouchable. If this spoke to something deep inside you, if you felt that shift, that pull towards becoming this silent force, drop a comment. I no longer explain, I just move and subscribe. Not because I asked you to, but because you're done being average. Welcome to the world of still power.